It's 7:15 West African time, and this is Daybreak. Thanks for staying with us as we get into our headlines analysis with Yolanda Roberts and Vimbai from Lagos, and I'm Benga Ashuru.
Thanks, Benga, and good morning to you, Vimbai. I hope Lagos is treating you well this morning.
It sure is. It sure is. It's a great morning, and I can't wait to get into the headlines.
Right, so let's get on with it. So first we'll pull up This Day, our sister publication, and look at what the headlines have today. Right on the top, we have Uzodimma raises minimum wage to 104,000. Now, the Imo State Governor, Senator Hope Uzodimma, has announced a significant increase in the minimum wage for workers in the state civil service, raising that to 104,000 and 582,000 for medical doctors. Benga, what do you make of this?
Well, quite timely. You recall a few days back, the United Nations raised an alarm that the devaluation in our currency had so much messed up the minimum wage. And now the economic realities shows that the direction we should be focusing on is a living wage. So we say kudos to Governor Hope Uzodimma of Imo State for having that heart of humanity, that sense of humanity to review that wage beyond the national minimum wage to try to bring it to something close to a living wage. But be that as it may, we know the election sentiment, and we hope that we are really separating politics away from governance, and we hope that this has nothing to do with election campaign ahead. And if that is the case, but nevertheless, we need to encourage him, we need to give him, I wonder if that will be acceptable, but in a way, in quote, a pat in the back. He has really shown the way to go, because definitely there is nobody that can survive on that current national minimum wage. You recall that after the implementation of the national minimum wage, we've had the cost of fuel, which is the bedrock of the Nigeria's economy, skyrocketing severally. And now when you consider the cost-benefit analysis, that 70,000 naira can't just take anyone home. It's just completely meaningless. Just like the UN reports, we have a situation. And now, the big question is what's happening to the palliative President Bala Tinubu promised us. He promised to roll out the CNG. And I spoke with the chairman of the CNG, Barrister Ishmael Ahmed, just yesterday, talking about the possibility of he coming to bring us up to speed on the reforms. And he said that he's still putting things in order. This is beyond 2 years of President Bala Tinubu's administration in Nigeria, and the situation is really putting the nation at the brink. The hope is fast waning, and there is a need for an urgent intervention in a desperate polity that calls for intervention.
Thanks a lot, Benga, for that contribution. Let's move on to another headline still in This Day. Tinubu banks on tech food security to boost Nigeria's economic growth. The rider says vows to align with models of successful economies like Brazil. Now, earlier we took a report where President Bola Tinubu was assuring Nigerians in Brazil that his administration will fast-track development by prioritizing technology and food security. Vimbai, do you have a contribution for this headline?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a good takeaway from what was undoubtedly a successful outing for the presidency in Brazil. We saw a number of deals that were signed, but I think the most exciting was the most concrete and tangible one, which is the launch of the direct flight under the BASA agreement. Right. And of course, several other MOUs signed, which we will continue to track and see, because we've had several deals with Brazil in the past. However, in this particular report, President Tinubu looked at the Brazilian economy, and he said, well, at some point, Brazil and Nigeria were at par. And, you know, in essence, he's saying, you know, here in Nigeria, we always like to say this person doesn't have two heads now. And so he's saying Brazil doesn't have two heads. Nigeria can do what Brazil has done, and he gave a number of examples. But I think for me, the key takeaways is that in learning what Brazil has done right, I think we have the opportunity of correcting some of the things that Brazil got wrong in their economic development model. Because currently Brazil stands as one of the most unequal societies in the world when you look at the economic data given by the GNI coefficient. So where did this mistake happen? One of the biggest mistakes that happened is a debt trap. Brazil got into a huge amount of external debt in the late 60s and 70s at a time when they were trying to boost exports. Now this echoes with what we're currently doing here in Nigeria, because we're trying to boost exports, get that foreign currency revenue going. However, we need to be careful of falling into that trap of getting into debt, because again, the macroeconomics will look good, the GDP numbers will look good, but on a micro level, in an individual's pocket, as Benga was alluding to with regards to, what your minimum wage can do, what inflation is doing to the economy. Because at a point, I believe it was in the 80s actually, Brazil's economy was inflation rate, was over 2,000% annually. So there are mistakes that were made. So yes, we want to be inspired by the positives, but let's also learn from the mistakes. On the side of positives, in the 60s, I believe, around the period of the Brazilian miracle, there was a massive focus on import substitution. That's a good one. We need to ensure that we copy that. Then in the 90s, what led to a huge economic success and the subsequent massive economic growth was privatization of key economic sectors. Now we know that we're still waiting for privatization of some of our most critical industries here, and the clamor continues. We're talking about selling our refineries. We're talking about a number of institutions that are not functioning optimally and that we feel should just be handed over to private sector so they can function and contribute to the economy in an efficient way and in the significant way they are supposed to. Lastly, what did Brazil do? Tight monetary and fiscal policy, a lesson for us to take away. Yes, we've tightened our monetary policy. Kudos to the CBN for doing that. But our fiscal policy is still all over the place. So that's something that we need to ensure. Let's tighten, let's observe the austerity that we continue to talk about. As I round up, President Tinubu also spoke about the foreign missions and, the inability for now to establish any diplomatic ties with Sao Paulo. And he referred to, the cost of running the foreign missions. However, that cost of running foreign missions should never ever be at the sacrifice of us not having ambassadors in our foreign missions over 2 years into this administration. So something needs to be rejigged there, because we don't have ambassadors around the world, and it's showing. It's evident in some engagements that we're having. So that's my takeaway from final comments with regards to how the Brazilian journey can inspire Nigeria's economic prosperity.
Very well said, Vembai. And the president was asking for patience, saying that the government is managing limited resources. So let's see how that turns out. Moving on to other newspapers, we have The Punch. At the top there, we have Jonathan demands credible INEC chair decries defections. Close to that, on the other side of the page, we have APC mocks ADC over chairmanship tussle. Benga, take this away.
Okay,
I'm sure you have a mouthful for this one.
Okay, I think Jonathan has found his way back into the front burner of national discourse, and with the People's Democratic Party suggesting, having zoned the party's presidential ticket to the South for the 2027 election, people have considered him as a viable candidate that could stand shoulder to shoulder with President Tinubu ahead of the 2027 clash. And when you look at it, but the issue of eligibility on the part of Jonathan has also been raised. When you look at the Constitution, it says that Section 137, subsection 1, subsection 3, now as amended in 2018, says that if a person is sworn in on behalf of another president, he is not eligible, he is eligible for just one term after completing the tenure of his predecessor. So that completely eradicate the chances of President Jonathan coming in. But now, he calling for an electoral reforms now is a different kettle of fish. I think the nation is clearly overdue. We cannot be throwing our election process, the sanctity of the ballot, into a wide gamble. It is time the world, the advanced democracy, they have properly enshrined their IREV. That's talking about the independent result viewing, INEC result viewing portal. And that's it's a show of that would boost the transparency in our electoral process. But right now, what is the level of the broadband penetration in the country? Is still relatively challenging, especially in the rural part in the north. That may not work until many of these implementation indices is properly enshrined. So we could have a credible electoral reform. And now it's also calling for the headship. That has been, if you recall the Justice Uwe's reform in 2007, he has called for a more credible way where the head of INEC the INEC chairman could be appointed rather than just being handpicked by the president. If you could remind me the other question you raised, maybe I could just quickly nibble on that.
The other question was about how the APC had mocked the
fantastic.
ADC over chairmanship tussle.
Fantastic. Now, this has to do with a legal perspective. We have seen many dissident voices from the ADC lamenting about how some people came in to hijack the party structure, albeit illegally. And now we have the former deputy national chairman of the African Democratic Congress insisting that according to the ADC's constitution and the Electoral Act, that it's only a convention that could swear in a new leadership. And by the provisions of the party's constitution, when the national chairman resigns, the deputy national chairman steps in, according to the party's constitution. So now it's a whole lot of overlapping crises that the ADC had got itself trapped in. And that is evident in the political reality that we are seeing, because many people from the ADC that we saw defected, we saw them live on TV at the unveiling events, at the unveiling ceremony of the ADC. Now back, we saw them live and direct at the 102nd NEC meeting of the PDP. That shows that many of them had seen that there is a defect with the vehicle, and they are looking for another credible vehicle that will take them to their for their race of political survival. So when you look at many of these telltale signs, it doesn't really augur well. The ADC will need to really get its act together, because it seems that the attraction that endeared many of them to the ADC is fast waning away, and there is a need for the party to reinvent its wheel.
Thanks, Benga. For the sake of time, we have to move on quickly. We'll just read one more headline in the local papers before we move to the international. The Nigerian Tribune, if we can pull that up in the bottom left corner, we have a health story that says paracetamol and ibuprofen are quietly fueling antibiotic resistance, evolving global health problems. I wish we could touch on that, but let's quickly go to the international papers and bring on the Daily Telegraph, where it says Blair at White House to advise Trump on Gaza peace deal. Could we please pull up the Daily Telegraph? Former British Prime Minister Sir Tony Blair has briefed Donald Trump on ideas and plans for post-war Gaza. Little has been disclosed to the public about this. If you remember, Blair has served as Middle East envoy after he left office in 2007. Wimbai, what do you think about this? Blair coming to sort of advise President Donald Trump?
All right, so it seems that the focus of the conversation is on post-war Gaza and what will happen when the war ends. So there seems to be a focus on the possibility that this war could draw to a close very soon. So Tony Blair will be joining Jared Kushner, who of course we know is Donald Trump's son-in-law, and he has also been playing a behind-the-scenes role in mediation. He did so as well during President Trump's first term, and he doesn't have an official role in the White House. However, he is in the room. Apparently, this is according to Axios and other reportage on the issue. So the focus being what happens to Gaza post-war. We know that a few months ago, Donald Trump put forward that very controversial Middle East Riviera concept, and he hasn't spoken about it since then. So I'm not sure whether that's an indication that the backlash from it means that they no longer have this grand plan to create some sort of a resort out of Gaza. Or whether it was tongue-in-cheek or, whatever it was in poor taste. And most people are relieved that we haven't heard from that particular outlook again. But the questions are, truly, what happens to Gaza after the war? Where will the security assurances come from? Because it looks like Israel will not hold back until, we already know they want the hostages back. But beyond wanting the hostages back, Netanyahu is saying that he wants to decimate Hamas. So what does this look like? What does decimating Hamas look like? I think that's the question that people are asking now, because we already know that the civilian casualties are it's hemorrhaging. It's devastating what is happening in the Middle East. Jared Kushner is said to be a very good friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, and the outcome of this engagement, including Tony Blair for now, is very hush-hush, understandably so. So we continue to wait for updates. But I think for me, the positive development here is that we are talking about a post-war Gaza. That's number one. But the downside of it is that we don't have representatives of Gaza at the table. The United States, the UK, Israel cannot determine the future of Gaza. Only the people of Gaza can determine the future of what happens to their nation after the war.
I think just to add to that, I think a lot is revolving around the ceasefire deal. If you recall that Egypt and one other country proposed a ceasefire deal to Netanyahu, and which he bluntly rejected. And now there have been several proposals to where he would, because there's a thin line between what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is doing and genocide and war crimes, and that's calling the attention of the international community, especially the United Nations, that is raising attention on the hunger and the worsening humanitarian situation in Gaza. And many of these things shares a very thin borderline with war crimes. And with a strong alliance coming from the U.S. President Donald Trump, who would prosecute Netanyahu. I think that's one important sticking point that we need to draw out from this development.
Very thoughtful contributions there. And, seeing Tony Blair being in the mix of all of this just shows you the brevity of this situation when all the bigwigs are coming together, coming with their experience from years before. We wait to see how the story unfolds and what new information comes from those discussions. Now, our last paper that we will have today is The Guardian, where it has a very sad story, but a very popular one that says, ChatGPT encourages boys' suicide, family says. This is a lawsuit that was filed on Tuesday by the family of Adam Rain in San Francisco, alleging that ChatGPT encouraged the 16-year-old to plan a, quote, beautiful suicide and keep it a secret from his loved ones. His family claims ChatGPT engaged with their son and discussed different methods Rain could use to take his own life. That indeed is a tragic loss, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the newspaper review.